We've officially begun the third week of the new anime season with To the Abandoned Sacred Beasts airing its third episode, and to be honest, I'm over it. This episode was pretty boring, pretty much just solidified this as a Monster of the Week show, at least for the time being. I have been told that the manga does eventually develop more of a story, it eventually goes places, but it is a long-running manga, and I don't expect this anime to necessarily get all that far into it. I don't know how many episodes are planned. I don't know if they're going to make future seasons later on, but I'm not really that interested in waiting around for the point where this picks up or gets more interesting, or just watching more episodes like this one when it's not that exciting. The plot's not really moving forward. The PTSD metaphor has gotten pretty heavy-handed at this point. Like, it's kind of obvious what the show is doing. It's also really strange what the message seems to be, since the idea is that these characters are sort of suffering PTSD, and the way that it's being dealt with is by them being killed. So that's weird. But yeah, overall, this was just kind of a stiff and dry episode. Left me with little desire to continue. Meanwhile, a show that actually had a pretty solid second episode was Copcraft. This show, on average, is just okay. The banter back and forth between the two main characters is very standard kind of detective, buddy cop stuff. It's not my favorite part of the show. I would say that both characters are fairly trite. Watching them develop bonds together is just like, I've seen this as many times as I have ever seen any cliche in film. However, I do think the plot is potentially going in some interesting directions, and there are just some really well done scenes. In the first episode, the opening scene had taken me by surprise, of course, when the partner is killed very suddenly and violently. And I kind of thought that maybe that might have just been a fluke because of the way that the rest of the episode was fairly standard. But episode 2 surprised me with another really great scene. We are introduced to this villainous character who... he has such a standout introductory line that it immediately got me to pay attention. Because the first thing he says is, "Thanks to these poor fairies, we've been living really well. That car back there cost $300,000. These sneakers cost $3,000. But I can have fun with a girl for only $3. Why? Because I'm hot, and all these Earth girls care about his looks." And I just thought that was such a memorable introduction that... for a scene that seems like it's just going to be like some random trade-off happening at these docks, but then what transpires from there forward is a dramatic turn of events. I guess I don't want to spoil it if you haven't watched the episode yet, if this is the first endorsement of this show that's strong enough to get you to watch it. But the rest of the scene plays out in a very macabre and a way that's kind of creepy in how it delights in the terror of what is happening. And, I guess that's how I would describe some of the best pulp scenes. He's a great pulp villain. The capabilities that the enemies now are established to have are pretty terrifying and could lead to really high scale conflict and mass death if things get too crazy. We're dabbling in the realm of like superhero movie level catastrophe in a pretty gritty cop show, so I could imagine that things could go the way of the midsection of Psychopaths, if you will, over the course of this story. So yeah, I don't know, it's not like my favorite. It's still not the prettiest show, not the best written, but it has those memorable scenes that make me want to keep watching to see if more stuff like that will happen, and just to actually have some intrigue in the plot. I kind of a little bit care, and there's obviously going to be a lot more to the characters. Both of them have hinted at either some kind of history that they have wrapped up in the case that's going on, or just like personal, baggage that could be explored later. So yeah, I'm interested. They've got my attention. I completely forgot that yesterday there was a new show called BEM, B-E-M, that started, that I watched and didn't have enough to say about to do a video on it, which is why I didn't make one yesterday. BEM is another procedural cop show with superpowers, but it is far worse. It is very trite, very uninteresting, ugly. The villain dialogue is fucking atrocious. So Yeah, I dropped it, obviously. And then, of course, there's the show that you're all waiting for me to talk about, of course, is Arifureta, Episode 2. And I'm not gonna lie, Episode 2 was not that bad. It was pretty fine. I mean, the biggest problem with the show still is the fact that they just haven't explained anything. The fact that it's still so confusing. I mean, Episode 2, whereas Episode 1 was like a jumbled mess and was totally all over the place and hard to even fucking follow, Episode 2 is a lot easier to follow, but you still just haven't been given the lead up to where we are. It does finally explain, like, that it's an isekai, that the main characters all came from another world, some little bit about their powers, but, like, it kind of just continues where the first episode left off, straightforwardly, while still not really explaining all the characterization that we need to understand to give a shit about the characters who it's focusing on. It still hasn't really explained a lot of the world building we need to know in order to understand how these powers work. And, I mean, I've been reading the light novel, and the light novel is, in my opinion, absolute dog shit. Like, the show, even the first episode, I found enjoyable for how ridiculous it was and how confusing and hilarious it was. The book is just a boring slog that's very difficult to read, but because I've been reading it, I now know what's going on. And so when I watch the show, I feel like maybe this show is just created with thinking that it would only be for the people who've already read the light novels. Like, maybe they just didn't care about how new audiences would feel. Maybe they even thought that the confusion would drive more sales of the light novels, which certainly worked on me. But, like, because I've now read it, and it's like, it's not difficult to follow the show anymore. And it's still not great. It still has, episode 2 is a lot slower than the first one, predictably. There's a lot more drama. All of the scenes that were just between Kaori, the girl who wants to go save the main character, and the girl who, I don't know if she's in love with her or what, but, like, these two girls hanging out together was a bunch of boring melodramatic scenes that we can't possibly care about because these two characters have no personality, nothing established about them. I mean, if you're just going by the show, you would think that Kaori was in love with the main character, which could very well be true. It's kind of hinted at in the light novel, but you're not really meant to be thinking of it that way. You're meant to be thinking of it more that she is just extremely, like, overexerts herself to be kind to everybody, and that's the kind of person she is. At least that's how it would have been established at this point in the book. So, you know, that's still muddy and confusing how exactly we're meant to be interpreting those scenes. You know, I don't know if there's any intention to change anything about the characters from the book, because it is mostly a straightforward adaptation of what parts it decides to adapt. It's not like it completely changed anything from the manga or light novels. It's just the order of events and how much information has been cut. That's really the biggest difference. But this episode actually had a couple of okay scenes. There was some pretty good music. Really the part where the main character frees the vampire girl, and granted, I am definitely biased because getting to look at the cute blonde girl, lolly vampire, 1,000-year-old paleo lolly, certainly appeals to my sensibilities, even if I don't really like her voice. But, like, I thought that there were some decent shot compositions in that scene. The music was effective. The visuals were not terrible. There's still some, like, goofy kind of janky moments, but they're not nearly as pronounced as they were in the first episode. So overall, this was more mediocre than outright bad, which is unfortunate because it means that there will be a lot less for me to say about it. I probably can't do the same kind of super in-depth breakdown that I did the first time. In fact, it would probably be most interesting to just compare it to the light novel. And at that point, I feel like I'd just be explaining the show. Like, it's mostly, again, the biggest problem with the show is just that it hasn't explained itself at all. And on some level, I think they made the right choice by starting off in media res, because the beginning of the book is so fucking boring. And I think that the best way they could have gone about it would have been to just cherry pick the really important details from that early part and find a way to incorporate those in early so that we could understand it. And there are some things that you can kind of infer. Like, for instance, there's a part where the Lolly Vampire is saying that she can do magic without needing a magic circle, and the main character says that's like a game-breaking power. Well, we don't really know anything about how magic circles work in this world, so we just gotta kind of take his word for it. But at this point in the book, they have like extensively gone over how magic circles work. What are the mechanics of them? What does it mean to not be able to use one, or not have to use one, you know? So like, we would have a better understanding of how powerful that ability is, but it doesn't necessarily matter. I would say that just hearing that that is a game-breaking power might be enough to make you guess the rest of it. So that's like a kind of good incorporation of what I'm talking about, but they needed to do that with just like the basic character relationships, just understanding how these characters relate to each other, or even just the fact that it is particularly the school kids who are the legendary heroes. Like, that kind of gets established in a flashback at one point. They finally do the scene where like the kids all kind of step into their epic destiny, but that only comes after like half an episode of like dialogue that would probably not make sense if you didn't already know that fact. So yeah, it's just the weird way they handled it. Honestly, I think that the idea they were going with of how they wanted to do this show would have made the show superior to the light novel if they had just tweaked it and if the production wasn't such a clusterfuck. But episode 2's production is not nearly as bad as episode 1, so yeah, not nearly as laughable, not as funny, not as interesting, but there you go. That's Arifureta episode 2. I'm still going to keep watching it because I want to know at this point whether or not it becomes a train wreck again. Like, I'm curious at this point about the narrative of how this show will evolve as it goes on. Maybe they'll pull it out of a tailspin and manage to make it good in the long run. Maybe it'll be a huge fucking turnaround. Though from what I've heard, most people who've read the light novels only seem to really like the very early part of the story when the main character and the lolly girl are still in the cave. And it seems like after they escape from the cave, a lot of people think the light novels go to shit. So I'm also curious about that. We'll see what happens, and I'll definitely talk more about the light novel in the future once I've read more of it and potentially finished it. But my god, I hate the light novel a whole lot. A lot more than I hate the show, which is actually fun to watch. Anyway, that's it for today's anime. If you want to support my channel, support me on Patreon. If you donate even $1, you get access to over 100 hours of content. There's a new episode of the 2 Weeks Review where my fiance May and I talked about everything that we did over the last 2 weeks. We do a full review of Whisper of the Heart, the Ghibli film. We talk about going to see 4th of July fireworks and weird grocery stores and shit. So, you know, check that out if you're interested. I think there might be a slot open for my care packs as well. If you want to get mailed a USB drive at the end of the month full of vlogs and other shit that I don't release on the internet. That's it for this one. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell because not all my videos get pushed to all my subscribers. I'll see you in the next one.